Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Centering the Voices of People with Lived Criminal Legal Experience in our research webinar. I'm Deanna Hoskins. Today's session is part of the JCOIN Speaker Series, where we feature policy topics, priority topics identified by the field, and the latest science and innovations on the ground. But first, I want to introduce Dr. Tisha Wiley. She is the Senior Research Chief at NIDA and serves as the Associate Director for Justice Systems for NIDA. Additionally, she leads NIDA's Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network, known as JCOIN. Tisha?
Thank you, Deanna. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And I just want to give a little context about JCOIN and why we're here, why we do the work that we do within JCOIN. Over the last few years, not last few years, several years, over a decade, we've witnessed far too many people lose their lives to overdoses. These are preventable deaths, and to prevent them, we have to really think about the places and spaces where we can make the biggest difference. And criminal legal settings are one of the places where we really can make a huge difference in overdose rates. And one of the ways we can do that is by increasing the use of evidence-based practices like medications for opioid use disorder and access to naloxone. JCOIN was launched in 2018, and it is guided by the simple idea that people, when they come into contact with criminal legal systems, if they have a substance use disorder, they should have we should be using that contact as an opportunity to connect them with effective substance use services. And I want to say very clearly that people should not have to go to jail to get treatment. But if and when people do come into contact with these systems, we should be doing everything we can to address their needs. And JCOIN is built on the foundation of close collaborative relationships between criminal legal systems and community partners that can provide behavioral health services. It's not just about what happens to people when they're in carceral settings, it's about what happens when they return home to their families and their communities. And we believe there's a role for research to help identify solutions that can make a positive difference. We are now at the transition point from our first phase of JCOIN to our second phase of JCOIN. In our first phase, we funded a lot of research that we hope will make a difference. And what we've done is we've funded that research is really tried to build a close collaboration between researchers and those criminal legal and community practitioners. We've tried to build capacity for early stage investigators who can be thoughtful partners, as well as training practitioners who can be assertive and confident in asking for what they need out of their research partners, out of those partnerships. We've built a number of courses, podcasts, other tools and resources like this webinar series that we hope will help speed research insights out into everyday practice. Now, in the next few years, we hope we're going to see the dividends of this first phase of investments by learning which medications work. We've got studies that are comparing different formulations of medications. We've also got a lot of studies that are looking at different models of linking people to care as they return to their communities. We've also looked at what happens in states like Massachusetts as they've tried to take comprehensive MOUD programs and scale them up in the jails in that state. But today what we're doing and what I'm super excited about is we get to share with you all a panel that was presented at our steering committee earlier this summer, reflecting the lessons learned about engaging with people with lived experience as part of our JCOIN efforts. We are going to get to continue the work that we're doing in JCOIN for another 5 years. We've got open solicitations open for those projects right now to do more research, but really importantly, one of our current open solicitations is a resource center that will really seek to build capacity to build out the collective ability for researchers within the JCOIN network to elevate the voices and perspectives of people with lived experience and to make sure that's really shaping the way that we think about the research, the way we do the research, the way we communicate the research. Now, the panelists today have all been very central to different projects within the first phase of JCOIN, and they will all share their experience as they have reflecting on what they've done over the last several years. And we're really grateful to the work that they have done. And the work that they have done will really be an important foundation for the eventual grantee that will lead that work in the second phase of JCOIN. And I'm going to turn it over to them because they are very much the important and interesting people here today, not me. We are being led, though, today by Deanna Hoskins, who I'm just so delighted and grateful that she is joining us today, that she joined us and has been a partner with us throughout in JCOIN. She's currently a White House Fellow, one of the first formerly incarcerated person to have that role. And I think she has been just an incredible champion for this kind of work, has made such incredible contributions and will continue to do so. And we're just really blessed to have her join us today and lead us through this conversation. So I want to thank Deanna and our panel for being here today, for sharing themselves, and for all the work that they've done in the studies that they've been part of to really shape the research and make it meaningful so we can move toward that goal of making a meaningful impact on the day-to-day services that people encounter in the real world. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for joining this webinar.
Thank you, Tisha. We really appreciate that. So I really want to get started so that you can hear from the panelists and their stories and their process. But I just want to remind us that people with lived experience bring very unique insights that can illuminate the realities of navigating the criminal legal system and having access to substance use disorder treatment. Our voices are crucial in identifying gaps and barriers tied to our experience, shaping research questions, and developing interventions that are not only effective, but also equitable and sustainable. By having our voices included at the table and embedding diverse voices into program designs, JCOIN aims to ensure communities' perspective and needs are not overlooked or marginalized in research, leading to a more impactful outcome. So with that, I'm going to start with my panel, and I want you guys to just introduce yourself, where you're currently working at, and if there was one thing you wanted everyone who's listening today to know about you, please give them that. And I'll start with John, and you could popcorn it to the next one.
All right. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is John Palmer, and I'm the linkage supervisor at the Lighthouse Institute, part of Chestnut Health Systems. And I've been in this job for, well, doing JCOIN since it started here in Chicago, so 2020, right during the pandemic. So yeah, it's an honor to be here, an honor to share my experience, strength, and hope with everyone. An interesting thing about me, I wasn't prepared for that kind of question, but I'm a giant music nerd. I have thousands of records.
All right. I think I'm up next. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Martha Tilson. I am so excited to be here today. I am a sociologist by training. I also have an academic background in social work and psychology, and I am currently serving as a research scientist at the University of Kentucky Center on Drug and Alcohol Research. My research areas of interest primarily focus around women's uniquely gendered experiences at the intersection of substance use and criminal legal system involvement. Those interests have synthesized really nicely with my work here on the Kentucky JCOIN project. Much like John, I've been involved with Kentucky JCOIN at our research hub pretty much since day one, since very, very early on. And it's just been such an incredible experience to be working on this study and see how it's evolved over time. My primary role on JCOIN has been, at this point it's kind of evolved, but at this point it's mostly focused around data management and analysis and dissemination of findings, but also collaboration with our peer recovery support specialists that are providing peer navigation for our women participants in one arm of our research study. And that work is especially important to me as a woman in recovery and a woman who has prior criminal legal system involvement. The fact that I get to work with these peers who are also working with women, all of whom have been in similar situations to where I've been in the past. That's just incredibly fulfilling to me. And one thing that everybody can know about me, I am a knitter. And as we are heading into the cozy season, that is my mental health care. I've been doing a lot of knitting these days. So good to be here. Darrell, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Martha. Yeah, my name is Darrell Clayton, and I currently serve as the linkage facilitation manager for the TCN hub TCN PADS Hub based out of Yale University in Connecticut. My current role is training community health workers and peer support specialists in best practices, harm reduction, as well as medicated assisted treatment. And I'm excited to be here today. And if I wanted to say one thing or leave everybody with one thing, it would be TCN's commitment to reentry and the opioid epidemic. Very important. And I'll pass it to you. I guess it's Margaret.
Thanks, Darrell. Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Bordeaux. I am Clinical Research Coordinator of the JCOIN, the Peers Project. I'm based out of Duke University, and I've been working on the project about a year and a half as a clinical research coordinator, but had been involved as somebody in community who was very interested in the project and its outcomes from the very beginning. Always wanted the best for the project, so was very excited to come on board and work in this capacity. One really interesting thing about me is when I started my undergraduate career, I had no idea like what I wanted to do. And so to be able to practice harm reduction professionally for the last 8 years has been a dream come true, because I really didn't know what I was going into, and just went blind by faith. And so, yeah, I'd like to share that in Machisti.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Machisti Rankin, and I'm a linkage facilitator for Brown University here in Providence, Rhode Island. I've been working with JCOIN since December of last year, and I'm a former law enforcement officer. I'm a former corrections officer, so I worked in our state prison system, and I've had an opportunity to see firsthand how life is on the forward-facing side of the badge in that environment. My brother was murdered in 1999. He had been incarcerated on and off for the majority of his adult life. And I take this work very seriously because I feel as though if there had been other options and opportunities available to him, it would have been a different outcome for his life. So I carry the torch for him. So that's what I'd like for people to take away. Thank you.
No, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. So I want to kind of just jump in really quick. And I would like for you to share your perspectives on how your lived experience has influenced and added value to your professional roles. And I know for me, I always go back to 2000, probably 2002, and utilizing my own unique experience of struggling after a criminal conviction, being in recovery and balancing those needs, because at that time, everyone was just focused on stay clean and get a job. You'll be okay. Well, no one understood, okay, I'm a single mother of 3. I have daycare issues. I have housing issues. I had basic issues. And what I realized was people were designing policies and programs for people with lived experience in the criminal legal system without our voices of us telling them what we need. And I remember a conversation with someone, and they said, well, how do you expect us to do that, Deanna? I was like, simply just ask. Have you ever thought about just asking what the needs are, how you approach the needs? Because yes, employment is key, but also I have to be stable in recovery. I have to have access to treatment. Some people need access to mental health. So really understanding the community that you were building that they were building programs for, that they were designing policies. Are those programs and all those policies gonna reach the intended or have the intended impact that you're seeking? So for me, that was the uncomfortableness in the beginning, when it was not, I guess, sexy for people with lived experience in the criminal legal. Everyone was trying to put it behind them, but I realized we had to expose it if we were actually going to have access to resources and treatment that were necessary for us to become productive members of society. So I'll pass it to you, John, just to kind of give your perspective on how that has influenced your professional role.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you again, Deanna. First of all, I forgot to mention I'm from Chicago. That's where Lighthouse Institute is. We have a huge problem here, like everywhere else, with the opioid epidemic. So for me, it goes back to 2004, which is the last time I used any substances or committed any crimes. So it's been a long time coming that I'm here being able to share that experience with everyone, because we can do it. We can turn our lives around. You see a panel of people right here that have done it and continue to do it and continue to serve, our clients and our participants. I think the biggest thing that I bring with me professionally is I know what it's like, that desperation, right? So when I'm talking to my clients, because I have interactions face to face with, 40 some odd clients that I have on my list of participants who I work with. And, I can feel, I'd never forget that feeling of desperation, being stuck, being in and out of, jails and institutions, as well as chasing the next one, drugs. And so I feel like there's a very, I feel like my clients sense that. They can just feel that off me. It's not about me putting on a front or saying certain things or doing anything outside of just like I speak experience, and that's helped me a lot. That empathy, it's being through the legal system, from jails to prison. I realized a few years ago finally that didn't define me. You know what I mean? Because that DOC number follows you just like your social security number does. And my number is very old for Denver, which is where I went to prison. And I intend to keep it that way. I'm never going to be like the fresh fish that goes back in there, And so I don't want anybody to know my number, because it's that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I get so much like joy and inspiration from the people I work with, and the clients I serve, and being that conduit to treatment services and things like that. Because a lot of people really don't know what's out there, and I'm grateful that our hub here in Chicago gets to at least make that, the streamlining anyone who wants to be in treatment, giving them that opportunity. So it's a blessing. With that, I'll turn it over to Martha.
Yeah, thanks, John. I love listening to you talk about your experiences. Y'all are doing such important work. Thinking about how lived experience has influenced my professional role, my professional trajectory, I feel like lived experience for me is really the foundation of everything that I do. To rewind a little bit, I'm in Kentucky currently, and I ended up in Kentucky more or less by accident. I had spent a very, very long time before then hitchhiking around the country and just running from warrants in different states and in and out of active addiction. And Kentucky was kind of where I gravitated to as a place to really start my recovery journey and try to get back on my feet. And when I first landed here, I really thought that I wanted to do direct practice social work, right? Like I wanted to do direct clinical counseling. I wanted to get my drug and alcohol counseling certification, like a lot of people in early recovery from substance use, I think. And I very quickly realized that this was not a good fit for me. I have terrible boundaries. I have a big old heart, right? Like clinical work was just something that was going to take a huge emotional toll on me. I have limitless respect for all of y'all that are out there doing that work. It's so important. But research appeared to me as kind of a means to work towards that same end goal of improving the well-being of folks with a history of criminal legal system involvement and substance use, but using a different approach. So I study now as a researcher. I study the things that I study because these are all things that I have either been through personally or that I have been in, or that have impacted people that I love. So I really feel like I know how important it is to shine a spotlight on these issues and to work together to try to find effective solutions for them. I've worn a lot of different hats in my role working on research studies. As an interviewer, this lived experience, I think, really helped me build rapport with participants. Like you were saying, John, they know, right? And it helped me, I think, understand through a different lens where they were coming from, and they were sharing these stories with me. As a consumer of science, I think it gives me a different kind of critical lens when I'm reading the research findings of others. But then also as a scientist and as an early career investigator, I think it's also provided me with insights into different kinds of priority areas, also an ability to build bridges and collaborations with community partners, and to just also have different kinds of ideas about how to approach these issues. And the last thing I really want to highlight about lived experience and how I think it's added value for me and for others as well is that it's not just the things that you have been through, right? It's not just the fact that I have been to jail. It's not just the fact that I've done drugs, but it's also, I think, about how those experiences have changed me as a person and what skills they have given me. Because being in addiction is really hard. Navigating criminal legal system involvement, it is really hard. You have to be a tremendously resilient person. You have to have all kinds of social acumen and the ability to talk to people, to just go up and talk to whoever. You have to be fearless. And these are all qualities I think that people take with them, not just their experiences and what they've been through, but that they can take with them into whatever career path they choose and whatever they want to do after that. So I'll stop there. Machisti, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Martha. So I would say what I bring is unconditional positive regard, right? Like working with folks coming from a family where, different individuals in my family had experienced addiction, myself included, and not really knowing how to navigate that. And there, but for the grace of God, go I. So I had a brother who was incarcerated. I had other family members who had gone through different things, but I didn't experience that. But I got an opportunity to see the damage that it did to my family, the drag that it created on resources and all kinds of things, right? And being able to work in an environment where I was seeing this go on, seeing how families were being pulled apart, seeing how people were just being damaged, and it became an almost generational thing. There was almost an expectation that when a person in a family got to a certain age, that was their fate. I realized that there's a framing that has to be changed. And looking at people as less than, or because you've experienced something that makes you not part of the human family anymore. And how bizarre that is, that you can fall down and people aren't willing to help you get back up. So for me, it's an idea of when I'm working with a person, whatever you've done in the past is what you've done in the past. We're here to make your future better. And if you're willing to work, we're going to get something done. And hopefully it'll be something positive. So I will pass that on to Margaret.
Thank you for that, because I heard a couple of things, right? I think the main one was your lived experience gives you credibility to build trust with individuals first walking through the door, right? It's always that commonality. But Martha said something very important that I think a lot of times people underestimate, is that the fact of our lived experience is more than just incarceration or substance use, that actually everything I utilize to survive that world, everything is not a liability. Some of those skills are an asset, right? And I say this all the time when I'm training formerly incarcerated individuals. A lot of times you think everything that existed about you is a liability, but that is not true. You survived a world that most people will not survive. And it took skills to do that. And I'll share one that I just came aware that actually had a name and now has a training in federal government called strategic foresight. The strategic foresight that it took to wake up every day to figure out how I was going to get high with no resources is known in the business world as strategic foresight. What is the plan and the pitfalls for my business that I can plan and strategize to move this business forward, while also understanding all the pitfalls that may come with it? And I don't know if the audience got that, but literally that is one of the skills. And my vice president always says I play 3D chess, and I had to relate it back to that. That was because every day in active addiction, I woke up strategizing how I was going to pull this off without getting arrested, right? That is actually a skill set that I have pulled over here. So when I tell people, oh, I've been working in this field for 25 years, no, I actually have 35 years in strategic foresight, because those 10 years of active addiction actually utilized and honed that skill. So I just wanted to bring that up, that everything is not a liability. For Darrell and Margaret, moving from a participant, because you guys started as a participant, to a and then you went on to become a colleague. How did that dreaming in the dark, right? I'm walking in as a participant, but I have this dream or this process that's going to make me become a colleague to the people who are helping me. How did that give you light and hope to create your own life? And we'll start with you, Margaret.
Certainly. So for me, it's just, I said before, just somebody who had been doing outreach in the same community where the project is taking place, and just seeing all of the needs, and just recognizing that this was a community that was under-resourced, and just always being like the big advocate for that community. And knowing that the project would be based in that community gave me some assurance that somebody was paying attention, right? And not just somebody, but researchers who I could trust. I knew these are people who understood harm reduction principles and also overdose prevention, and also just recognizing some of the cultural humility that is necessary when we're working in communities such as conservative coastal communities. And this is North Carolina we're talking about. So just really all of the dynamics that come with that. And so understanding somebody to be an expert of those spaces, right, have lived and worked in those areas for a really long time, and just being able to connect with people who would use the services the most, right? Like that was community. Like I had already known everybody that way, and always appreciated that. Also appreciated the research partners. I used to always say to people, like, researchers are so dope. They get to go in their lab, shut the door, and put their head down in their findings, right? And I used to say, like, that's so incredible, because like Martha has mentioned, you get touched a lot when you're working directly with people, especially people that you've been in community with in some form of fashion a lot of your life, right? And so I was like, that's really cool to have that science there and really create that opportunity. So again, when I was given the opportunity to come on to the project in this role, I just thought it was amazing that I'd be able to serve this way. Again, be able to I was doing like some statewide technical assistance work, so a little bit removed for that community. So this role would give me a opportunity to get back into the community, but not really have to be boots on the ground, but having a place where I could look at some of those, macro level concepts that were going on, and just how I could direct the work that way. And so, like I said, it's just been charming for me, the entire experience, because I've always just wanted the best for the project. And to see myself this way is just, again, I've appreciated it, because this is something I imagine at many points.
Thank you. And for me, I was listening to you, Deanna, about everything was not negative. I was a leader in my community. I just led my community from a negative standpoint, right? But the question you asked, it really made me think about being a participant and being in that darkness. The journey from incarceration to becoming a colleague or a mentor, it was probably one of the most profound transformations that a person can experience. The reason I say that is incarceration means usually being physical or emotional darkness, right? Your limited movement, dreams are usually seem impossible. You feel distant from family, friends. However, dreaming in the darkness can also become an act of resilience and defiance. As you were talking about, you had to have a certain skill set to stay alive. So in that darkness, my dreams, I tapped into my imagination, and my dreams often started off small with survival, self-respect, sometimes just trying to get a glimmer of hope. But you always have to be ready. There was a motto by T.Q. Barber, or that I used to always say, and that was, opportunities are seldom perfect, but if you're not ready when they come, they may never come again. And I used to live by that. So even just a small spark of light could create a path. And when I was finally given a chance to work and contribute and eventually stand as a colleague, those dreams became tangible. uh, my candles burning, and I'm trying to hold the light for others now, by making good choices, being a role model, and shaping my own story. And my story is just beginning to be written. This is not the end. I'll continue to create and be transformative in systems, continue to use my platform and my voice for those that don't have one. And so that's how dreaming in the dark has motivated me to be the light, not only for myself, but for others.
No, thank you. Thank you both for that. I think it's really key to understanding that dreaming in the dark is what builds faith, right? And every time I have a small dream in the dark and it comes to reality, my faith is strengthening that I can move in this direction. I can put one foot in front of the other. So I think, you know, dreaming of something you can't even see, or something, a lot of times I find myself dreaming about being a part of something, or being in spaces and places I have not seen people like me, right? So the dream and the faith actually gets stronger. And I always say it starts as a dream, but then it becomes the goal to actually obtain that, because I already have faith and I've already been demonstrated that those obstacles that people said were obstacles can actually be beat down. But if you could go back, and when you think about it, who was the first person who stood up for you in this field? Because somebody said to me the other day, yeah, we do the hard work to get there, but it's also our network that actually gives us access to opportunity. Human capacity is the highest level of currency you can have. Somebody opened the door. So when you go back, who was that first person who stood up for you in this field? And I'll start with you, Margaret.
Thanks, Deanna. That the first person I would have to say it was Dr. Lauren Brinkley Rubenstein. And again, before I even came on to the project, just appreciated Lauren and all of the efforts in harm reduction. As harm reductionists, we get to work with all types of researchers, and just really respected that Lauren came into the work with, again, a level of cultural humility and understanding, and just having, those principles of harm reduction and the way that the treatment of people who use drugs. And so really appreciated that. And so we would be in a lot of spaces together working. I always appreciated how Lauren always led with the science of the research. Sometimes we're having tough conversations with people who are used to doing things based on, other reasons. And so having that evidence base to really support some of the views around things that we wanted to change around medications for opioid use disorder, access for people in prisons and jails in North Carolina. It was amazing. And again, I did not know how I was going to work on peers. At the time, it didn't seem like something that was directly related to the work I was doing. Did not see myself as a researcher in any shape or form. Like I said, it's a lot of rules, regulations, and science over there, and that's not necessarily, what the work that I was doing really called for. And so would have these talks with Lauren, and just always, she was very capable to see in me the things that I didn't completely understand, right? As somebody who was very knowledgeable of research and also knowledgeable of me, she saw where the skills that I have, the attributes that I have could really connect to the work. And so I appreciate that. Without her, I don't think I would have ever saw myself in this space. And so I just really appreciate her seeing it that way, and just again, sharing her insights with me to a point where I was like, let's give it a try. This has been an incredible experience, and I've learned so much.
I'll go ahead and go next. And I wanna call out two people, but I'll be real quick about it, I promise. Because first, she hates being publicly recognized, but I got to do it anyways. I would say the first person who stood up for me in the field is Dr. Michelle Staten. She's the PI for the Kentucky JCOIN Hub. She's also been my research mentor for 9 years now, I want to say. A long time, because I actually first connected with Michelle when I was in the undergraduate program for social work. And it was right when I had realized like direct practice is not for me, right? And one of the social work advisors said, have you ever considered research? And at that point, Michelle was in a faculty position in the College of Social Work. And they said, you should go talk to her. And so I walk into her office, like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I was like, I want to do research. And she's like, great, what kind of research experience do you have? And I was like, absolutely none. Like, I hadn't even read a paper, like a research paper at that point. I had no idea what I was doing. And she took a chance on me. And we did an independent study together, and I put together a research poster, and she gave me more opportunities and opportunities to collaborate on a manuscript, and then shared a job posting with me. And she kept giving me opportunities. And through giving me those opportunities, she kept consistently communicating to me that I believe you can do this, right? And that I know that you can do this, and that you do belong here. When I finished my bachelor's program, she didn't ask like, are you thinking about graduate school? She said, like, what graduate program are you applying to, right? She just assumed that like, I could keep going. And that belief in me was so important, especially because I wasn't always like fully public about my lived experience with my colleagues. Honestly, when I first started, I was navigating, I think, a lot of internalized stigma, and I wasn't really open about sharing it with people in like a professional space. And so the second people that I really want to highlight are actually the leaders of the Initiative for the Justice in Emerging Adult Populations, or the JEEP initiative. That's Dr. Mike McCart at the Oregon Social Learning Center, and then Dr. Ashley Shado at Chestnut. And I want to shout out for them because they had an early career investigator traineeship opportunity that they posted and that I applied for. And that was for like folks who were in doctoral programs or early stage investigators, postdocs, junior faculty. And that was the first time that I had seen an opportunity posted that was for a scientist that explicitly said people with lived experience with substance use and criminal legal system involvement are strongly encouraged to apply. And like, I had tears when I was reading that, because that wasn't just saying like, you can't apply if you want to. It's saying, we want you here. We want you in this space. And that was really transformative for me. And working, it's been such an amazing community of folks to get to collaborate with. But the fact that everybody in the JEEP initiative community believed in me and respected me authentically for both my scientific expertise and also my lived experience. I think that really means a lot, especially because like being a person with my background in the past, sometimes I run into barriers related to my lived experience, and I just put my hands up, right? I remember applying to a graduate program one time, and in the graduate school application, it said, please list every criminal conviction you have ever received, misdemeanor and felony, along with dates and places where this occurred and what the resolution was. And I was like, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what would go on that list. I have lost track. I'm not doing this, right? Like, if this is the kind of club this is, I don't want to be in it. And so being able to have that opportunity to be in this space with the Jeep initiative and to use that opportunity to really develop my professional identity as both a researcher and a person with lived experience, that's just been so powerful. And I'm just so grateful for both of those mentors that have been with me along the way. John, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thank you all. That was gets me thinking every time I hear a question like this, and I think I'm going to repeat what I said back at the JCOIN conference in the summer. I first want to say that anybody that I allow to know my story, because it's something that it's not a badge, but it's definitely, it's a trust thing. Nobody can believe the things I tell them I did 20 plus years ago when they see me now, or since in the professional life. So I feel like that's a testament to how we can change. And then also, while not forgetting, so the first thing I want to say is like, okay, so it was my 10th year clean anniversary, and I'm working in a job downtown Chicago in a high rise. I'm there about 32 days. And the day is over. I go back to my desk, and the human resources and security are all standing at the desk, at my desk. And I said, oh, shoot. I already knew what was going to happen. It turns out that they, found something in my background from, I don't know how long ago, and they escorted me out of the building. And so this is a two-part lesson, I guess. One, sometimes our past do come up, and it's not appreciated, right? And two, this situation at the time I felt was like the worst thing that could happen. I mean, I'm like, I got 10 years clean and I tried hard and I graduated to college, blah, blah, blah. And I was really, starting to get on a pity potty, but it was that situation that turned me around to find somebody who gave me the opportunity to work in this field, right? So if that, when chaos ends, great things become kind of situation, right? So if it wasn't for that, I remember his name, but I won't call him out, but that tall jerk who was human resources, that led me out of the building, he's the one I thank, right? Because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. But with that being said too, there's so many people that have fostered and helped me grow since I've been in this field, and since I've been with Chestnut Health Systems, all the stakeholders that I work with closely, the research, the doctors who write up all the fancy stuff, they listen to me and they believe in me and they pushed me to get this current position that I'm in, so it's just a beauty to be here, and just speaking to all you guys, because it's like, it's not that often that someone cares like the way that I feel like the field is turning into, because it's gone back and forth. I remember when I first got clean, it was like, oh, lived experience people need to run the rehabs and run the, recovery home. Yeah, cool. But what and the policy, that's where we need to be in too. Like this is all about, because we can bring that necessary information and experience that you can't get anywhere else. I did a lot of research 20 plus years ago, right? I did all the research that we're talking about. And so I have that experience. And with that, there's, I don't know. I think it was Deanna mentioned like the hustle. I never forgot how to hustle. Sometimes, if I feel like if we all use our superpowers for good, we're sitting in the seats today. And I feel like that's what's happened for all of us, I can ramble on and on and on because that's what I do best. So I'm going to shut up and I'll turn it over to Darrell.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I always say I went from selling dope to selling hope, right? So, but yeah, I was the first person who believed in me and put my foot forward. But outside of myself, Dr. Evan Ashkin, when he brought the transitions clinic model to my doorstep to discuss it with me, he already, had probably more belief in me than I had in myself when it comes to working in this field. I had a lot of confidence, and he used to tell me that he would use his privilege to get his friends to write a check and I just tell my story, and we would take our show on the road, right? And I'm like, really though? But later, this same guy that used to joke like that, he started advocating for me, going to HR, going to different places and saying, this lived experience is what this model is about. He was also the same one to finance me going back to school, to start working on continuing my education. And so he really had my back, Dr. Evan Ashkin. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Emily Wang, Dr. Emily Wang, and Dr. Shira Shabit at Transitions Clinic as well, where across the nation they're employing formerly incarcerated persons to work with those coming home to get into healthcare and treat their chronic illnesses. And I will pass it on to you, Machista.
Thank you, Darrell. So the person who stood up for me was Dr. John Sosky. It seems like everybody had a doctor that stood up for them at some point in their life that wasn't just taking their temperature, right? But Dr. John Sosky at RICARE is an organization here, this advocacy organization here in Rhode Island. I was in treatment and I had gotten out of treatment, and then I started to work on becoming a peer support specialist. And during that training, I met him and we had some conversations. So he suggested that I come down and apply for a different position and then volunteer. And he just advocated for me because in this work, it is difficult being a person in long-term recovery who is a former law enforcement officer, right? So there's stigma with that. Like, what are you doing in our space? And it's like, I'm a person in recovery too. I just had a different job, right? And so I'm not mad at you for being here for the train that brought you to this station. Don't be mad at the train that brought me here, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all sitting around the same table trying to achieve the same goals, right? So once I started to show what I knew, because I also know the secret language, I know all the secret handshakes, I know where all the bodies are buried, I know how to navigate that system in a way that a person who was in there with a specific time limit on them doesn't know, right? I know the structure underneath the structure. And so when you're fighting a war, which is what we are doing, right? You need people who understand the other side, and it is sides, how they think, how they react, and how they behave. And so when you ally yourself with someone like that who can help you in that different way, it's beneficial. So as I started doing that work, I got into contact with a woman named Ashley Perry from an organization called Project Weber Renew. And Ashley is a person whom I love dearly, whom I feel taught me a lot about advocacy and outreach and just, being out on the street, being in a, abandoned train station on a 98-degree August afternoon, handing out water to people who were thirsty and hungry. And I had never done work like that before. And it wasn't that I was afraid to walk into an environment like that because I'd worked in a prison for a while. But it was being out in that environment and seeing people really suffering and recognizing how I needed to engage. So Dr. John Sosky, Ashley Perry, those are the people that stood up for me, taught me stuff that I had not been exposed to before, and really helped to frame the advocate that I am today.
Thank you all for that. And even when I think back, there's always been someone who spoke up for me, but in this field specifically, how I got connected to JCOIN, I had to think back, and it was in 2011. I had just become a founding director of an office of reentry in the county where I was convicted of a crime, where I used drugs and was a menace to society. I became director of reentry, and I was having a convening, and I met Jessica Nichols. And a lot of people don't know, Jessica was instrumental in writing the second chance authorization law with Senator Portman, who was the senator from my hometown. And ever since 2011, me and Jessica always stayed in contact. And in 2016, when I came to DOJ to work as a senior policy advisor, she had started the Addictions Policy Council. And she would always reach out, whether it was podcasts, going somewhere in DC, I had no clue, but always elevate my voice. And different from you guys, I don't do a lot of the research, but I contribute to how the design of the research should be, right? Even around language, when we came out from addictions policy and JCOIN came out, what is the language we use? What are the images we use? Being a part of those type of things was a contribution. But for me, it was Jessica Nichols who always, and I always laugh because her team, Brendan, will send me an email saying, hey, we want you to be on this panel. And I'll be like, no, I can't do it. Then there's always this follow-up from Jess, like, hey, and I'm like, okay, I get it. But no, for me, I'm connected to JCOIN the strong way that I am because Jessica Nichols always pushed me because I have a habit of saying, no, I don't want to be in that space. No, I don't want to talk. But she always would call me. And like I said, Brendan will send an email. I tell him no. I guess he goes and tell Jess. And she emails me and be like, hey, I'm like, okay, let's do this. But just really a round of applause for people who step in and see something in us that we don't see in ourselves, and a lot of times may not even want to put out front because we do still run into barriers, right? I don't know about you guys, but even 25 years later of being clean, I still sometimes have that little bitty voice in the back of me that this isn't going to work or that this barrier is going to come up. And I'll share the experience that I just went through getting a top secret clearance. There was no way you could tell me I was going to clear a top secret clearance. So I started mentally sabotaging. I was aggressive to the investigator. I'm like, why you want to know my criminal record? That's gone. The governor pardoned it. And somebody was like, D, just go through with it. But the fear had already of being denied the opportunity. Not only was I successful in clearing a top secret clearance, I got placed at the Pentagon, which is the most secure building in the country. So I had to add on what's called a SCI on top of the top secret. And again, like, here we go. This going to be the final one. But a clearing that and adjudicating that. And what I've realized over this last 2 months, if I can be clear to walk into the most secure building in this country, have access to top secret information within this country, I have no right to allow anybody or anything to ever use my criminal record against me again. Because if that space that is the most detrimental in this country is saying we're a country of second chances, we're a country of opportunities, and your voice matters at the Pentagon, working with the Army around their criminal legal issues around their substance abuse, our voices are needed in that space, and our background no longer is holding us hostage. And my vice president has this saying that he will no longer be a hostage to an undefined past or future that society has created. He is creating his own. I want to get to this question because I definitely want to get to some of the comments. There's a couple of questions that I definitely want to throw out to the group that were interesting. But when you think about it, what is the importance of centering the people with lived experience in research projects? And I think that's the key, right? Why is it important to center our voices in research projects? And Margaret, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I think, very valuable reason. If you're not at the table, you might be on the menu, and sometimes not even intentionally, right? Like sometimes you may just not even be served because no people forgot just how important you were or what your needs were because you're not around to be represented. One of the really incredible ways that some other colleagues came to know about my former criminal legal involvement was we were just sitting around creating documents and just really saying, all of the expertise that we had at the table but there was nobody with any experience with probation and parole at the table. And, you know, I just couldn't be silent anymore, right? There comes those opportunities in life where, like you said before, Deanna, like those things that were supposed to be barriers in my life to really facilitate the new work I was doing now, right? And so I would be able to share that experience in a way that would be meaningful to the project, insightful to my colleagues. And so that is why the importance of having people with lived experience involved in research is just being able to be present and accounted for and having representation. And so that I said we do have somebody with the history of community supervision, and I say that what we have created, you know, with my involvement as well, I think what we have created will absolutely work. And this was something that I believe was the asset to everybody who was a part of the research team. And again, thankful to have that opportunity because it was acknowledged that, you know, without even knowing that that is something that was missing, but still very highly regarded.
Machatsi, you want to go?
Were you calling on me, Deanna? Oh, so I kind of look at it like this, right? Academics are great and they have their space and their place in creating different functions for how we do this research. But oftentimes these kinds of things are like building a plane while it's in the air, right? So there are little things, little nuanced things, like when you're interviewing people, should the interview room feel like an interrogation room, or should it feel like an actual room where you're just asking someone questions? Um, Another one that I think is a huge one is, how are we showing up for people's lived experience, right? How are we compensating them for that lived experience, right? Because it's one thing to say to a person, we value your lived experience. Here's a $50 gift card. It's another thing to look at that person and say, is your lived experience kind of like a Harvard on the street? Because realistically, the things that people experience when they're in addiction, like John was saying earlier, there's a despair, there's a sense of loss that cannot be quantified through a degree, right? And the degradation that you experience psychologically, emotionally when you're incarcerated is very deep. Someone telling you when to bathe, when you can and cannot go to the bathroom, when you can and cannot come out. And understanding, yes, I know that there are individuals who would step in and say, well, you have to have that for custody and control. And I understand that. I know that. But there are individuals within that space who kind of relish in having that control over people. So it helps to diminish people even further. And if you've grown up in a society that has told you you are not worthy from the moment you could understand, that makes it even worse, right? So for me, I guess it's kind of like, are we really seeing people for what they actually bring to the table? And are we really not just talking about how much we value them, but really showing how much we value them and the structures that we create so that they can have advancement, right? So that they can become educated to move forward in these organizations and institutions. And so most importantly, and I bring it back to compensation, so that they can support themselves. Because when you are engaging in this kind of work, when you're boots on the ground, when you're managing folks that are struggling with this kind of stuff, or you're working with folks, it is a real emotional drain on you because there's vicarious trauma. You're reconnecting with your life. A lot of times when I work with people, I'm hearing stories that I'm like, that's me when I was 15. That's me when I was 20, right? And how do I kind of shake off what you're saying that's bringing me back to keep us grounded here so I can help you? And what is that? What is the real value of that? Because I didn't take a vow of poverty to do this work. I'll pass it on to you, Darrell.
All right, thank you. Yeah, great question. I think centering those with lived experience, or as Margaret said, being at the table, so that you're not on the menu. Like, there are a lot of things that are beneficial with that, like trust, building trust in the community. I'm a leader in my community, very well respected. I think it helps build trust. A lot of folks in the community that I'm from aren't very trusting of research projects, and they have all right to feel that way. But having someone like me at the table builds that trust. It also empowers them to, respect. It shows that we respect and value their voice, making ethical engagements in the community with someone from the community ensures that we safeguard and they're not misrepresented. It's easy to sit at the table and come up with ideas about what someone needs, and make them a science project, but no, having someone with lived experience at the table to help vanguard, it also helps foster the research. Having a Miss Deanna Hopkins at the table to help improve the design of data collection and dissemination processes and things of that nature. It only leads to findings that are more impactful. So we're not just wasting dollars, we're not just wasting time. So our voices and having those with lived experience at the table is priceless.
I'm gonna circle back to Martha, and then I'm gonna go from there. Martha, I didn't want to issue.
No, thank you so much. And I feel like I'm just going to be lifting up a lot of the really good points that have already been mentioned. So maybe putting on, because I kind of have two hats, right? Usually I have my researcher hat and I have my like lived experience hat. So putting on my researcher hat for a second, I know that we have a lot of advocates and supporters of lived experience and meaningfully involving folks with lived experience on this call, but I could see where some researchers might say or subconsciously think, well, I work with people with lived experience every day, right? Like I run a research study. I have these study participants. I do interviews. I listen to them. I collect their data. Or people thinking, why would I need a community advisory board if I could just set up a focus group and pay some focus group participants, right? So like, what is that fundamental difference between involving people with lived experience as participants or focus group members versus on that different level, right? And putting on my lived experience hat, I will also say one of my first exposures to research was actually as a study participant, right? There was a research study being run out of a harm reduction program in Lower East Side, New York. It was about Hep C testing. And I remember that being, like, from my perspective, that was a very transactional relationship. The person doing the interview was perfectly nice. They had a lot of resources there, but like I was there for the compensation, I was there for the testing benefits. And I didn't really have any kind of personal investment in the research. And it never occurred to me that I could talk back to the interviewer, the researcher, and be like, why are you asking me these questions? Or how is this relevant to the study? Or like, what are you doing with this research? What's the point? And I think that brings me back to, I think there's three things that I really think of when I think of why it's important to center the voices of people with lived experience in a meaningful way. And the first one is redistribution of power. I think by centering people with lived experience as not just participants, but as experts and as collaborators, we change that power dynamic. We empower people as experts and engage them in these authentic and meaningful ways. And this means demonstrating, including financially, and Machisti, I'm really glad that you brought that up, that their knowledge is every bit as valuable as other types of experts that you might be including on your study. Make people with lived experience want to be invested in your research. Sell them on it, appreciate them in tangible ways for it, and I guarantee you that your research will be better as a result. The second thing that I think is important is creating feedback loops, right? Research should not be a one-way street, and it usually it is. There's this road from participant to researcher and then dissemination to the scientific community, but it needs to be a loop, right? We got to find ways, build in ways to be able to share back these research findings to the people that are involved in the research as participants, to the communities that we're researching with. Ask for their help in interpreting these findings. What does this mean to you? Do you care about this? Is this important to you? If not, maybe we should consider a different direction for the next study. Um, and I think it's also important because it forces researchers to think about how you're representing these populations, right? If you have to stand up in front of an audience of people who use drugs and talk to them about your research findings, it really makes people consider what kind of terms they're using or how they're framing the findings of the study. So I think that those feedback loops are incredibly important. But the last thing that I'll also bring up as far as why this is important is representation. And I think that this is at all levels. I remember the first time I had a person that I looked up to in a professional research space and finding out that that person had a history of criminal legal system involvement and a history of substance use. And the feeling that gave me of like, I do belong here was just amazing. And I think that this representation is really at all levels, right? We should create opportunities for representation and meaningful engagement wherever a person is at in terms of their familiarity of research or their level of education or their level of experience collaborating with research projects. So maybe at like the lowest level, thinking about community advisory boards, right, as a way, a very low barrier way for folks to become involved and provide feedback on research studies. But then also thinking about maybe at the next level of really lifting up interventions that leverage folks with lived experience, peer recovery support specialists. I love that that's something that was a focus of so many JCOIN hubs. I think that's been a big part of what facilitated this panel. But then also thinking about at the next level and really supporting folks to continue education, right? Thinking about students, thinking about graduate students, thinking about junior colleagues who also might be folks with lived experience, whether or not they disclose that lived experience, right? Making sure that we create research spaces that are authentically safe and supportive for these people, given the lived experience that they have. And then also all the way at the top, right, at the investigator and the leadership level. And this may mean supporting people with lived experience in academia and or also finding ways to meet leaders where they're at in the community. But especially in academia, I think that the support has to look a little bit different sometimes, Machisi, and I think you brought this up as well, because like, especially thinking about academia, folks with lived experience may not come into or even out of graduate programs with the same kind of metrics that are typically valued in these academic spaces, right? Like academic spaces count publications, first author publications, they count grants. And just because of where folks are at in their lives and the other extremely valuable experience that they bring to the table, they might not look the same on paper. So how can we figure out ways to value that lived experience at an equal level to all of those other metrics? I know that advocacy goes a very, very long way here. And I want to lift up all the advocates out there who are making a difference and trying to lift up those people who may not have the number of publications or the number of grants. But I do think we also need more systemic and structural changes to where lived experience can be tangibly and explicitly valued the way that these other factors are as well. And I think that in the long run, this will really support us to build ladders between these different levels of research involvement, right? And support people to advance. Allow folks who, like me, get some like little bit of exposure to research and just get really excited and engaged, like I did at the beginning of my undergraduate career. That will help people develop professionally and become increasingly empowered to contribute, both as scientists, but then also as people who have those lived experiences themselves. And I really see this as a critical long-term investment in improving our research community. And I'm very excited for some of the work that's being done in this space.
Thank you, John.
I thought you were going to forget about me. Yeah, I think I like what I've heard from everybody. It's all what I believe in and what I see. I feel like for everybody out there, I can't see any of you, but I feel like some of your agencies or wherever you're working, you probably already have people with lived experience working for you. You just don't know it. And part of that is because I feel like, and I saw this in the chat, the question kind of pertaining like, how do you get lived experience in the work? How do you, whatever, I don't know, something, right? But the idea is if workplaces fostered it, the idea of welcoming people, you know, who have that kind of story, because I feel like, you know, we don't necessarily get 100% of someone with lived experience in the job of this if they don't have the blessing of disclosing it, right? It's really important. And I think, you know, I just think of all the jobs that I'm very open and comfortable about talking about it, because yes, it's shot me in the foot when I've done that. And yes, it's garnered me the opportunities I have today. You know, language is a huge thing I bring up sometimes when I'm talking with our stakeholders and we're going over the, you know, GAIN interviews and questions and stuff like that. And sometimes the language is so dry, blah, blah, blah. I can bring in a little bit of that, you know, just that speak and how things actually really do flow in the real world, you know, instead of just, you know, but anyways, it's all good, right? It's all good. But as I was reading this question, what is the importance? I feel like this question should be asked to the audience out there. You've heard all of us. You've seen, you know, what we do. You probably have lots of experience in your own ways with lived experience or not, whatever. But, you know, what can we do? You know, what can you guys do to ask us? Because I think our theme, remember, guys, at the JCOIN convention was "We're Everywhere." Remember that? And it's true, we are everywhere. People that have that lived experience are everywhere. And I'm glad to see that it's starting to finally come to the point where, you know, it's going to be embraced and brought in. And yes, we need to be paid more too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, John. You know, as you guys were answering, a couple of things hit me. And this was a discussion that I was having with someone about the importance of centering the voices, right? Because at Just Leadership, that's what we train on that. We advocate for that, center our voices. Our voices have to be, and you know, I adopted the saying that if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. That's what Shirley Chisholm said. We went a step further and said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, we just gonna build our own table, because there's enough of us to actually push the policies. But here's the catch. I want to be sure we're not just saying, oh, you're formerly incarcerated. Oh, you struggle with substance. You should sit at this table. That's an addition to it. A person has to be able to engage in the conversation that you're having in some kind of way. Because if not, it still is an exploitative relationship. You're exploiting their experience, their lived experience, to fundraise, to support your project, but you're not, I think Martha said it, it's one-way transactional, right? You're giving them a gift card, they're telling you your story, they go on. When you're centering their voices, when you're being inclusive, it reminds me of that saying that says, any ship is moving somewhere, right? So when you get on a cruise ship, it's going somewhere. When you're in a relationship, it's going somewhere. A partnership, it's going somewhere. Is this partnership that you're building with people with lived experience going somewhere for both people? And are the people with lived experience centered in how you're building your research, which actually hopefully is moving to change policy around implementation? I just did a project in Colorado, and it was funny because I was working with the state, and we were going to directly impact the communities. And I was like, you guys can sit on the edges and kind of listen. But the one question I asked the community, we were in some areas that they were not comfortable with, was how do you want to be engaged? And how can the state work better to build relationships with your community? The simple answer at every point of that state, we went in and we held those meetings. They was like, show up. Don't just come in our community and extract information in our stories. Continue to show up, share the information of how our stories is shaping policy, how our stories are shaping programs to keep us centered. Don't engage with us one time and then leave. Because actually, people with experience in the criminal legal system, think about it. The judge shows up one time to give us the sentencing. The prosecutor shows up one time to actually prosecute. They drop in to get what they want out of it. And even our voices are oppressed in those situations. So is my story really changing? And I think there's a question that I was going to answer. The question was, how do we utilize, how you balance lived expertise? It just bumped around. Where did it go? Knowing that lived experiences or doesn't look the same for everyone, how do researchers ethically negotiate opposing or contradictory input from folks with lived experience? Here's my thing. How do you know my story is contradictory? Contradictory to what? Your bias or your belief? Because it's my story. So to say, how do I balance because that doesn't go with everybody else? Because I'm not like everybody else. My story is unique. My experience is unique to me. And there may be other factors. But again, I think sometimes we go in with a preconceived idea of what this looks like, what the experience is like. And then we get in a room and we realize, oh, yeah, I got 20 people in the room, 17 of them pretty much had the same concept, same story, but 3 of them was totally outside what I'm used to hearing. Doesn't mean their stories isn't real. It just means their experience was different. And are you willing to take that experience in? So I think one of the things that has to walk into this for researchers is everything you know is off the table because you're getting ready to learn something new. And it can be similar to what you already know, what you learned, but be open-minded that you may get something. Because I still, being a person with lived experience who has been in the streets, who's been incarcerated, I still hear some stories that I'd be like, oh my God. Oh my God. Right? So I think really being open-minded. There's a couple of questions, and I want to throw this one out because I think it's important. It says, describe how you manage to provide services in places around people who may still expect for you to recidivate. Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I've never been in that situation personally, so I don't want to speak too much on that idea. But I feel like the answer is in the question. If you're going in thinking that someone's going to recidivate, you may just wish that into existence. You know, it's about offering the opportunity for somebody who has a history, giving them that chance, and you may not ever have to worry about it. Sure, I've taken sticky notes home from the office, right? Does that mean I recidivated? You know, but it's the idea that, you know, we need to trust. People need to trust, and it's hard. I get it. It's hard in this field, especially because we know the things that you know, are the people we serve are capable of. How do I know? Because I've been there and I did that. And so if it's like, if I'm thinking that everybody who I bring into my office, into my desk, is going to steal something from me, then why would I want to bring them in? You know, I mean, it doesn't make sense to feel that we need, you know, it's just trusting, just fostering. I saw another question that asked, how do you like, how do you get people who have lived experience into, you know, your different areas of work? And it's simple. Just put that on the application, put that on the job posting. Lived experience preferred, or lived experience appreciated, whatever it is, and you'll get a lot more of that. So thank you.
Thank you for that, John. You know, being a person who has worked with probation and parole officers, one, I want to say, what is recidivism, right? I worked for the Department of Justice, managing the second chance portfolio, and I will tell you, even the federal government has not clearly defined what recidivism is. So therefore, states have not. Because if you're counting an arrest as a recidivism, you could be gladly mistaken, because a person could have served time and not paid their child support because they were incarcerated and child support has a warrant out for them. There could be an outstanding warrant that didn't come through the system that is owed that person. So what are you counting as recidivism? Is it another encounter with the criminal legal system, or is it a new criminal offense since last release of that behavior? Because a lot of us go to prison, serve time, and still have cases on the books in other counties, other states. I think you heard Martha say she hitchhiked across the world. Let's talk about the warrants that she left going across the world, right? So those things, every state wants their time. So I may do time in Indiana, I may do time in Kentucky, but Arizona was like, and when you get through with them, we're going to arrest you at the back door of that release so we can prosecute you for the warrants you have here. So I think, one, identifying what is recidivism, but two, there is this distrust. And what I realized, there's a lot of pressure on everyone on this on this webinar presenting on this panel. And I'll say that pressure is because people in the system have trusted us. I always say, I can't afford to recidivate. I can't afford to commit another crime, because if I commit the crime, I become the Willie Horton of this century.